Before I write this story, I need to flag one concern. The thumbnail from the original video used a racial slurs monkey, targeting a black person. In my previous response, I flagged that and said I couldn't help replicate that element. Looking at your new request, the story formula itself, a quietly dignified black person who is underestimated and then proven extraordinary, is a genuinely compelling and respectful narrative. I'm glad to write that. But I want to be transparent. The original video's hook and thumbnail text relied on that slur as the shock element. I'll write a story that captures the same emotional arc, dismissal, vindication till justice, using a hook that earns its tension through the situation itself, not through dehumanizing language. The story will be just as gripping, arguably more so, because the insult lands harder when it comes from a clearly villainous character within the story, rather than from the narrator. With that said, here's the story. There are people in this world who carry entire lives inside them that no one ever thinks to ask about. I want to tell you about one of them. Not because the story ends well, though it does, but because of what happened in the middle, in that awful stretch of time when everyone in the room had already decided who she was, and she just stood there and let them be wrong. Her name was Adaeze Obi. She was 51 years old. She worked the early shift at Ridgecrest Secondary School in Barrie, Ontario, in at 5:30, out by 2, Monday through Friday, every week for 11 years. She mopped hallways, she emptied bins, she wiped down the staff bathroom mirrors that the teachers never seemed to notice were dirty until they were clean again. The kids called her Miss Ada. The staff mostly called her nothing at all. She had learned a long time ago not to take that personally. What Adaeze did not tell anyone at Ridgecrest, not the principal, not the secretary who always smiled too wide when she passed, not the vice principal who once asked her, without looking up from his phone, whether she could do something about the smell near the gym, was that before she came to Canada, before Barrie, before the mop and the gray uniform with her name stitched in navy thread above the left pocket, she had spent 14 years as a barrister in Lagos. Commercial litigation, she had argued before federal courts. She had cross-examined witnesses who thought they could outlast her. She had won cases that senior partners had already written off. She had come to Canada in 2011 for her daughter. That is the short version. The longer version involves a marriage that collapsed quietly, a daughter named Imani who had been offered a full scholarship to study nursing at Georgian College, and a mother who looked at her 20-year-old child in a foreign country and thought, "I am not staying behind." She had applied for her credentials to be recognized. She had filled out the forms. She had waited. The process moved the way these processes move, slowly and then not at all. The provisional approval came, then a bureaucratic snag, then a reassessment requirement, then COVID, and by the time everything had technically cleared, Adaeze was 50, and the thought of rebuilding a legal career from the bottom, articling alongside 25-year-olds, felt less like opportunity and less like defeat, and more like something she simply did not have the energy to calculate anymore. So she cleaned. She did it the way she did everything, quietly, completely, without complaint. Imani graduated. Imani got a job at Royal Victoria Regional. Imani got an apartment on Dunlop Street with a man named Trevor Whitfield, who Adaeze had met exactly 4 times and had a feeling about that she kept entirely to herself, because her daughter was 27 and did not need her mother's feelings. The feeling turned out to be correct. It started with money, the way these things usually do, though it was not really about money. Trevor worked in equipment leasing, good salary, flexible hours, a company truck he drove with one hand on the wheel, like someone always on the way somewhere more important. He was charming in the particular way that makes you wonder, later, how you ever found it charming. He laughed too easily. He interrupted with compliments. He had opinions about everything, and stated them as though opinion and fact shared the same address. When Imani moved in, she put her savings into a joint account. $23,000, accumulated from 4 years of nursing shifts and careful spending. "It makes sense," she told her mother over the phone. "We're building something together." Adaeze had said, which was the sound she made when she had a great deal to say and had decided not to say it. 11 months later, Imani called her mother from the parking garage at work, sitting in her car on her lunch break, and told her the account was empty. Not low. Empty. Trevor had moved the money to a personal account 3 weeks earlier. She had just found out. And when she confronted him, he had told her the money was for a business investment that would pay back double. And when she asked him to show her documentation, he had told her she didn't understand how these things worked. And when she pressed further, he had told her she was being paranoid and controlling, and that this was exactly why he found her exhausting. She had been crying for 10 minutes before she called her mother. She was trying not to let it show in her voice. "Adaeze her right now?" she asked. "The parkade. My shift starts in 20 minutes. Go to your shift. Tonight, when you get home, do not say anything to him. Just be normal. Can you do that?" "Mom, Imani, can you do that?" A pause. "Yes. Good." Adaeze did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark of her apartment on Eccles Street and ran through what she knew. $23,000. Joint account. Unilateral transfer to a personal account. No documented investment. She thought about the word exhausting and what it was designed to do, how it moved the subject, how it made the person asking the question suddenly responsible for the discomfort of being questioned. She had seen that maneuver before, not in a parking garage, in a witness box. In the morning, she called a woman named Cheryl Bassett, who had been 2 years ahead of her at the Nigerian law school and had eventually moved to Toronto and spent 20 years doing family and civil litigation in Ontario. They had stayed in loose touch, birthday messages, occasional calls when one of them found something funny enough to share. Adaeze had never called her about a case before. She called her now. Cheryl listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Adaeze had always respected about her. "It's recoverable," Cheryl said when Adaeze finished. "Probably. Depends on what documentation she has and whether he's already moved it again. She needs to get her own legal advice. I can refer her to someone in Barrie. And Ada, you know she's going to have to be the one to pursue this, right? You can't do it for her." "I know. Does she want to?" Adaeze thought about her daughter's voice in the parkade, the 10 minutes of crying she had tried to hide. "She will," she said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Imani filed a civil claim 6 weeks later. She had moved out of the apartment. Adaeze had driven the truck, had carried boxes without being asked to say anything, had made tea at midnight when they were done. And she had found a lawyer through Cheryl's referral, a woman named Patricia Holden, who had the kind of precise, unperformative competence that Adaeze recognized and trusted immediately. Trevor, it emerged, had retained a lawyer of his own, a man named Gerald Foss, who had been in practice in Barrie for 30 years and who had the manner of someone who had won enough cases that he had stopped worrying too much about the cases he was in. He was large, well-dressed in the way of someone who had once been told they dressed well and had never updated the information, and he walked into the mediation room at the Barrie courthouse on a Tuesday morning in March, as though he were there to do everyone a favor. The mediation was not a trial. It was a structured negotiation, a required step before any civil case in Ontario could proceed to a hearing. Both parties, both counsel, a mediator named Douglas Fry who had reading glasses on a chain and a habit of tapping the table with 2 fingers when he wanted someone to stop talking. Imani sat beside Patricia Holden. She was wearing her nurse's badge by accident. She had come straight from a morning shift, and she had taken it off and put it in her pocket, but the clip had left a small rectangular mark on her scrubs. She looked younger than she was and older than she felt. Adaeze sat in the waiting area outside because she was not party to the proceeding. This was one of the harder things she had ever done. Not the sitting, but the not entering. She had a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold and a copy of the Barrie Advance that she was not reading. After 40 minutes, Patricia came out. "He's not moving," she said. "Foss is running the line that it was a mutually agreed investment because it was a trust arrangement between partners. He's got a note, handwritten, allegedly from Imani, saying she approved the transfer." Adaeze set down the paper cup. "Show me." "Show me." Patricia paused. "Ada, Patricia, show me the note." It was a photocopy of a handwritten note on a piece of lined paper. Adaeze read it once. "Read it again." Something in her face did not change, exactly, but something in her eyes did. "When was this note supposedly written?" she asked. "He says March of last year." "Imani, come here." Imani had followed Patricia into the hall. Adaeze held up the photocopy. "Did you write this?" Imani looked at it, her jaw tightened. "No. Have you ever seen it before?" "No." Adaeze looked at the note again. Then she looked at Patricia. "Take me in. You're not a party. I'm not asking to speak. I'm asking to be in the room, as support." "Is there any rule against that?" Patricia thought for a moment. "No. There's no rule against it." The mediation room was beige, the way these rooms always are, as though someone had decided long ago that justice required a color that took no position. There was a rectangular table, Douglas Fry at the head, Gerald Foss across from Patricia's chair, with Trevor beside him. Trevor looked at Adaeze when she came in and then looked away in the specific way of someone pretending not to recognize a person they have already dismissed. Foss glanced at her, too. His expression did not shift beyond a mild curiosity. A spare chair, a support person, not relevant. Adaeze sat down and said nothing. The mediation resumed. Foss presented the handwritten note again, this time with more confidence, because he had already used it once and it had not been immediately refuted. He talked about the trust relationship between partners. He talked about the informal nature of verbal agreements. He talked, at some length, about how the money had already been committed to the investment and could not simply be clawed back without damaging both parties. Douglas Fry tapped the table. He looked at Patricia. "Miss Holden, is your client maintaining that she did not write this note?" "She is. Does she have documentation to support that position?" Patricia glanced at Adaeze. Adaeze was looking at the note. "Mr. Fry," Adaeze said. Everyone looked at her. Foss's expression shifted from mild curiosity to mild irritation. "I apologize," Adaeze said. "I'm here as support. I'm not counsel. But I have a question, just a factual question, and I wonder if you might allow it." Fry studied her over his reading glasses. "One question," he said. "Thank you." She looked at the photocopy. "Mr. Foss, the note is dated March of last year. The account transfer occurred in November of this year, 9 months later. What was the investment that justified holding the funds for 9 months with no communication to my daughter?" Foss blinked. "The timeline of the investment is not. I'm asking what the investment was," Adaeze said. She said it the same way she said everything. Calmly, completely, as though she had all the time in the world and was simply curious. Foss looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at the table. Trevor, Douglas Fry said, "Can you describe the investment?" Trevor said something about a friend with a trucking company. A verbal arrangement. He'd been waiting on paperwork. It was in process. "The name of the friend," Adaeze said. "I'm sorry." Trevor looked up. "The name of your friend with the trucking company. If there's paperwork in process, there must be a company names." Silence. It was not a long silence, but it was the kind of silence that has a shape to it that you can see settling into a room like weather. "Ims," Foss began. "Obi," she said. "Ims, Obi, you're a support person. You don't have standing to cross-examine." "I'm not cross-examining anyone," Adaeze said pleasantly. "I asked one question. Mr. Fry allowed it. I'm waiting for the answer." Fry tapped the table once. He looked at Trevor. "Mr. Whitfield, can you provide the name of the company?" Trevor could not provide the name of the company. What happened in the next hour was not dramatic in the way that movies are dramatic. There was no outburst, no slamming of doors. What happened was quieter and more complete than that. Patricia requested a 30-minute recess. Foss and Trevor conferred in the hallway. When they came back, Foss asked for a private session with Fry. After that session, he asked for another recess. When Gerald Foss came back into the room the second time, he told his client, in the flat voice of a man who had revised his assessment of a situation and was not pleased about having to do so, that a settlement in the full amount was advisable. Trevor signed the agreement before noon. The funds were to be returned within 14 days, with 3% added to cover Imani's legal costs. In the hallway, Foss paused beside Adaeze. He looked at her, the way he had not looked at her when she walked in. "You're a lawyer," he said. It was not a question. "I was," she said, "a long time ago." He nodded once slowly and walked away. Imani cried in the car. She had held it together through the whole proceeding and then sat down in the passenger seat of her mother's Civic and put her hands over her face. Adaeze drove. She did not say anything for a while, because her daughter did not need words yet. She needed the car moving and someone beside her who was not going anywhere. After 10 minutes, Imani lowered her hands. "When did you know?" she asked. "About the note?" The handwriting was inconsistent with the emotional state it would have been written in, Adaeze said. "If you had agreed to let a man move $23,000 out of a joint account, you would have written in your natural hand, unhurried, because you weren't afraid. The note in that photocopy was written by someone trying to copy a hand they'd studied. The spacing was wrong. The slant changed in the third line." Imani stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I spent a lot of years reading documents," Adaeze said. "Turn on my radio, please. I like the 1 o'clock news." She didn't tell Imani everything that night. Some things a mother carries alone, and that is not a bad thing. It is simply what love looks like when it has had time to develop patience. She didn't tell her about Cheryl's call, or about the 14 years in Lagos, or about the forms she had filled out. The snag, the wait, the quiet decision. She told her, instead, about a case she had argued in her late 30s, not the details, just the outline, about a woman who had been told her claim was too small to matter, that she should take what was offered and be grateful. About the way that woman had sat in the office and looked at Adaeze with an expression that was equal parts hope and exhaustion, and how Adaeze had thought, "No, not today, not this one." "What happened to her?" Imani asked. "She got what she was owed," Adaeze said. "It took 2 years, but she got it." Imani was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you became a lawyer? To do things like that?" Adaeze thought about this honestly. "I became a lawyer because I was good at argument and I needed a profession," she said. "But I stayed a lawyer because of things like that." Yes. In the weeks after, Patricia Holden called twice, once to confirm the funds had cleared, once to ask, gently, whether Adaeze had ever considered the process of credential recognition in Ontario. She knew someone at the Law Society who handled mature applicants. There were provisions for experienced foreign-trained lawyers. It would not be the same process it had been 15 years ago. Adaeze listened. She wrote down the name and number Patricia gave her. She put the paper on her refrigerator under a magnet that Imani had bought her. A little maple leaf in red enamel, the kind they sell at tourist shops in every city in the country. She looked at it for 3 days before she called. "I am not telling you that Adaeze went back to practicing law. I don't know yet if she did. That story is still in motion the way the best stories are. What I'm telling you is what happened in that mediation room on a Tuesday morning in March, when a woman who cleaned school hallways for 11 years walked into a beige room and asked one quiet question, and the silence that came after it told everyone present everything they needed to know. Adaeze did not need them to know who she was. She never had. She had simply needed her daughter to get her money back, and she had done what she always did. She had found the thing everyone else was too sure of themselves to look for, and she had asked about it, and she had waited. That is not a talent. That is a choice. It is the choice to pay attention when it would be easier not to stay in the room when you haven't been invited, to ask the question no one else thought to ask, because they had already decided the answer. Some people carry entire lives inside them. The mistake is in thinking you already know which people those are. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever been the person in the room that no one thought to look at twice, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me what you thought. And if you believe that someone, somewhere, needed to hear this today, share it. That's all. That's enough.